Hello everybody. We're going to talk about a little bit of a complicated concept today. It's kind of advanced level UI. You see, sometimes you have a list of stuff, and you want the player to be able to control that stuff. It's got like settings and stuff, and you kind of want the player to be able to play with it, but you don't know how many things you have, and you don't know what they are, and in fact, you may not even know that they're possible, because maybe someone modded them in, or they're DLC, or who knows. So how can we pop up a UI for an arbitrary list of things that we know nothing about? I'll show you how I do it, and feel free to chime in with suggestions if you've got other ideas. So here in the ship, we've got two rooms, one on the left and one on the right. Each of the rooms has two beds, 1, 2, and 1, 2. But they could have anything in them. They could have medical equipment, or libraries, or computers, or psychic crystals, who knows. The room doesn't really know that much about what's inside of it, and it certainly doesn't know how the player is supposed to interact with those things. The room has no concept of what exactly a bed is, and it certainly doesn't know how the player is supposed to set up a bed. That's out of its control. It has no clue. So how do we display any number of things and allow the player to control them? Well, we click. There we go. So this is a pretty simple way to do it. And there's two steps. The first step is pretty easy, but the second step is a little bit more difficult. The first step is, how do we get this stuff into the vertical list? That's not too hard. We're using a technique I call the mix-ins. Mix-ins are mono behaviors you can just drop onto anything in the game world and they'll just work. So if we look at the glaive and we go down into the room and we dig in, here you can see mix-in furniture bed and mix-in furniture bed. We've got two mix-ins, so therefore they pop up two of these. Now if we were to copy component and paste as new, 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 and paste as new. One more, paste as new. Now when we trigger it, look at all these beds. And it doesn't matter where they are. Right now they're actually on that room, but they could be sub-objects, meshes within the room, who knows. How does it work? This is pretty easy peasy stuff. So let's take a look. Over here in our room control, when we click on the room, this happens. And what happens is it says, could you look for all the mix-in edit pop-ups in the room? So anything that is of the class mix-in edit pop-up gets found. And then down here it says, okay, we're going to go ahead and instantiate the UI prefab for each of them. And we're going to stick the UI prefab into that vertical list. And that's really the heart of how this works. Each of the mix-in furniture bed scripts descends from that mix-in edit pop-up script, but everything would. If it was psychic crystal, then it descends from the mix-in edit pop-up. If it's a medical bay, it descends from the mix-in edit pop-up. So that's how you pop those up. You just search through and find all of the volunteers and then stick all of their prefab UI elements over here on the right. And this is what it is. See down here, prefabs UI, pop-up UI. This here is this. The question is, how do these get connected? There is kind of a barrier. When I'm building this room bed control UI, and I'm setting up what this dropdown does, how do I get it to edit the room on the ship? The normal answer for that is you write a heck lot of fragile code. So you've got like the room class, but then you've also got like the room UI handler class that has to have specific code to respond to different UI elements. And it's super fragile, super expensive, and also super annoying for modders to have to deal with. I didn't want to have modders write any code, and not unless they wanted to. I wanted a modder to be able to just go ahead and use the existing classes and wire everything up using game objects and the inspector with all of its Unity events. So how did I set that up? Well, you can see right here, here in the prefab, this is the prefab, not the instantiated one. Down in the prefab, it says mixinfurniturebed.mode. So when the value changes in the drop-down list, the room's value changes. But that's not the spaceship room, because this is in a prefab. It doesn't know that the spaceship exists. How did I set that up? Well, like any good magician, I've actually got two copies. Mix in furniture bed. Yeah, it's right here on the UI prefab. Because it's not embedded in a ship, it never activates. It never tries to find people, because that's a core part of the logic in these things is if it's not on a ship, it doesn't do anything. So this is a passive object. It just sits there and does nothing. But you can edit it using the drop-down list. And you can make this as complicated as you'd like and as arbitrarily convoluted as you prefer. You can even write code to do more complicated things, like have a list of crew members that pops up or whatever. But how do you get them to reflect back and forth? And the answer is they're the same class, so you just use reflection. Yeah, what I do is each of these beds has a link to this UI, but you can see that this is also a mix-in furniture bed. So the mix-in furniture bed links to a mix-in furniture bed prefab. And when that gets created, pop-up.mirror the one that exists in the game. So when we create this over here, we say, hey, you need to mirror this guy that actually already exists. And that's the extent of it. All we then have to do is make sure to copy values properly using reflection. So I'll show you how that happens. It's pretty straightforward. Here's the mix and edit pop-up, okay? Absolutely nothing complicated about it. First, there is the link to a UI prefab. Now, this is a little bit loosey-goosey because in theory, a descendant might have the wrong subclass linked. So mix-in furniture bed might link to, psychic crystal UI, and it would just barf after that. But I'm not really that interested in safeguarding that to that extent. I could use an interface or something if I was that panicked, but it's okay. It throws an error, so that's good enough for me. This is the link to the UI prefab, and this is what gets instantiated and tucked away in the vertical list whenever we are asked for what prefab we'd like to put in our vertical list. Down here we have this edit pop-up event on change. Now this is just a Unity event here, and all it does is whenever anything changes in this object, it calls that and says, I changed, this is me. And it passes itself to whoever is listening. It doesn't know who's listening. It doesn't know what's listening. All it says is, I changed, here is me. And this is used by the UI elements over here. So when I change this value to hot swappable, then it will change itself and it'll say on change, I changed, hey, whoever's listening, I'm changing. And as it turns out, here in the game world, on the spaceship, there is someone listening. This room here is listening. Watch. So that is the heart of this. Whenever the UI object is changed, it announces that it's changed. And then the world object says, okay, that UI object changed. I should copy all of its properties and set myself up to be identical to it. Easy enough. Before we get that far, though, we actually have to set up the UI object to have the same objects as the in-game object. So although the in-game object copies from the UI object when you're editing it, the UI object has to copy from the game object to set itself up. Well, it's the same thing either direction. Let's keep moving down here. Copy, mix in pop-up source, mix and edit pop-up source. And all this does is copy all of the properties using very basic reflection. Now this is not fast, but we're not doing it very often, so it doesn't have to be. So we say get the type, and if the type is wrong, then just throw up. And this is kind of my safety, so that if someone tries to create a psychic crystal UI for the bed, it goes, that doesn't make any sense. Then we grab all the fields, and we just reflect. Now I have sort of brute forced my way out of reflecting anything that ends with the word event, meaning that I won't mirror any of these Unity events. And this is very brute force. There are other ways to do it that aren't so loopholey, but I don't really care at this point. If you happen to know the perfect code to get that done, let me know, but otherwise I'm not too worried about it. Basically, I didn't want to mirror all of the eventing because the eventing is going to be different for the game object in the ship and the game object on the UI. But all of the properties that aren't events need to match. In this case, that means the mode, but it could mean anything. It could mean, psychic crystal. It could be the volume of the psychic resonance or the frequency of the what's-its. Who knows? The point is they have to match everything but events. So I've excluded the events, and then I have set it up to copy from the source. This is super basic stuff if you know reflection. If you don't know reflection, this is basically the first example you'll find if you search on how to do it. So it should be pretty easy for you to get this figured out, and you are welcome to do a quick Google search for it, and it will look literally like this. There's almost no difference in how you do this. This is like a very static method. It's just boilerplate. And that's sort of my excuse for I'm not planning to share this as an atomic object with you guys. You can't really download it and use it. I'm going to release all this code as CC0, but there's a lot of code here, and almost none of it has to do with this. So you shouldn't have any hard time with this. This looks complicated if you've never done reflection before, but it's super basic. Anyway, once we're done copying from a source, we mark ourselves as dirty. When we mark ourselves as dirty, that just changes. That just says, okay, I changed. So this is what happens here. This copying happens in two directions. When the UI object is created, it has to copy from the in-game object. So that happens immediately. So it goes, I'm copying from the in-game object. Okay, I mark myself dirty. I have changed. Now, what's listening for that? Well, the answer is all of these pop up as the correct setting. So if I change this to character A and then hit escape and then click, you can see it's still character A. And if I switch it over to hot swappable and then escape and click, it says hot swappable. So what exactly is handling that? Well, down here I have a mode set, and I've set that up to make the dropdown reflect the mode of the bed. And because of that, what happens is I copy all of my values over from the in-game version of myself, and then I make myself dirty, and that tells the dropdown that, hey, this is the value you need to be set to, regardless of what you're set to in the prefab. So that just makes the UI mirror the in-game object properly. But after that, anytime we get marked dirty, we're actually going to want the game object in the game world to copy us. So this is the part that's a little bit order of operations-y. You need to copy all of the values up from the in-game object, and then announce that you're dirty to set all of your UI values correctly. And then you need to sign the in-game object up to monitor you. And that's what happens down here. This is the mirror that gets called, if you might remember. Room control popup.mirror the in-game object. This is that. So first we copy from the in-game object. Then we set up our mirror value just to remember who we're copying. And then we add that guy to our onChange event. So we've set it up so that whenever we change, the other object will copy us. And here in onDestroy, we unsign up for it. I'm not actually positive this is needed because I think that the Unity event object actually handles its own cleanup. But we're going to be playing it safe. So on onDestroy, we unsign up. And that is the whole of it. So basically, to go over it from scratch, the room contains an arbitrary number of mix-ins. Each mix-in contains a link to a UI object, and the room just goes through, finds all the mix-ins, and pops up all the UI objects and sticks them all in this giant vertical list. When it does so, it signs the two objects up to mirror each other. So once that happens, we copy all the values from the in-game object to its compatriot on the UI object, and then we sign up the in-game object to reflect changes to the one in the UI. Unfortunately, this does require a little bit of extra code on the actual objects themselves. And this is where it's obnoxious, because the copying of properties does not copy getters and setters. It does not use getters and setters. It only copies raw properties. So for example, this here, when I do public int mode value make 30, when I am actually cloning from the in-game object, this never gets called. It just copies the mode over directly. That's a little obnoxious in some ways, but it basically means that we have to manually trigger the make dirty. We have to manually mark it dirty at the end of our copy procedure, which we do. It's not too difficult, but we have to remember to do it. But it also means that we have to have an associated event for every single copyable property that we want. Now, this is something I would like to hear from the peanut gallery about. If you have an easier way to set this up, feel free to let me know, because right now, the way that I have it working is anything that you want to clone, you've got to create an event for it, and then you've got to invoke that event with the correct values in the mark dirty script. So if you happen to know a faster way to do this, a less error-prone way to do this, I'm all for it. I'm all ears. One way I thought about was I could go through all of the properties using reflection again, but how would I trigger the events properly if I was doing that? This is the only part I'm unhappy with, but the end result speaks for itself. It is a method to create an arbitrary list of objects and have it create an arbitrary UI interface for that arbitrary list of objects, and it requires no code from the UI programmer. The UI guy does not need to create any code. The UI guy can just focus on creating a UI. He does have to properly make it so that it sets itself up based on, events from the bed and events from the UI objects, but that's basic UI wiring, and anyone who's any good at it should be fine. I hope this was clear. If it was unclear, let me know. If you didn't understand something basic, like how to create a vertical layout or anything like that, that's definitely not this particular video. This particular video is specifically about this kind of UI trick. But if you have any refinements for my UI trick, I would love to hear them. Thanks for your time.